Outlaw Country by Ghotty. Chapter 11, When the Devil Calls, Part 2. I burst through the window, glass trailing behind me as I soared through the air. The crowd looked up in stupefaction as I flew further than any human should. They were too slow to remember that they should be shooting. I landed exactly where I'd hoped, atop a vehicle. The gunner looked quite surprised as I shot him in the head, and I dove in after his corpse before the surrounding gunmen could get a bead on me. The interior was sizable, enough so that I could clearly see the driver and the co-driver, who both quickly became interior decorations. The dead driver's corpse must have fallen against the controls as the vehicle flew forward, catching the important-looking man and smashing him in the lower body against the wall. He was looking quite surprised when that happened. I quickly climbed to the gunner's seat and manned the machine gun. Half of the surrounding men pelted the gunner's nest with gunfire, while the other half quickly realized what exactly was about to happen. They turned around and booked in the other direction as fast as they could, but it did not matter. I quickly figured out that I was supposed to press both buttons with my thumb, which was an odd configuration, but worked wonders. I could see where I was aiming through the thick glass viewport and began to gun down the surrounding enemies. It kicked like a mule and shot faster than a Gatling gun, practically sawing through the targets I wiped my barrel over. More screams, more blood, more vultures. I kept shooting and they kept dying. Only one made it across the street, arms flailing wildly as he ran indoors. He was covered in blood and, mostly the blood of all of his comrades. I was too. I climbed out of the gunner's seat. I considered taking the vehicle, but I had no idea how to drive it, so I didn't bother. Wait, whimpered a voice. I drew an aim at the source of it, only to find a well-dressed man from before. He was still pinned against the wall, the entire lower half of his body completely pulverized. I suppose the vehicle was keeping him, in place with his guts all squished in. Good for him. "Where is Charles Woodwork?" I asked. Voice even. No point trying to intimidate a dead man. Maybe he was feeling helpful. He wheezed, and I doubted he could feel much pain. He raised a shaky hand and pointed at the building a few streets down. It was fancy as hell, with 3 stories, and they had a classy wooden finish to the outside. Frankly, that was my first guess, but it never hurts to ask. I said nothing more and just left him there. Heard his voice from behind me. "All units, converge on Town Hall. Suspect is..." I didn't let him continue speaking before I finished him off. His body slumped against the hood of the vehicle, and he was speaking into sort of a box-like device on his hand, which I assumed let him communicate with his compatriots. An oversight on my part, I suppose. It didn't matter. Now everyone would be in one convenient place for me. Time to finish this. I checked my guns one last time, began walking towards the town hall, taking the chance to calm my heartbeat. There were no more gunmen, and they were all more than happy to follow orders and put more people between them and me. I walked down the street, breathing deep, taking in the familiar sights and sounds. Fearful gazes from behind curtains, doors slamming shut. The slower bunch finally made it indoors, women screaming loudly for no particular reason. I hated the last part. The sound grates on you after hearing it a few umpteenth times. There weren't all that many people, really. Neither was the town that big. It only took these 3 streets until the town hall came into sight. It was about what I expected, surrounded by a veritable horde of armed men and women. They were rushing into position around the arches of the exterior of that building, and more were still throwing down what looked like bags of sand. There were no more vehicles to be seen. I figured they probably sent most of them out with their away team, and only had one left in town, just in case. Without heavy armor, they stood no chance in hell. I crept through the back of the nearby 3-story building. It seemed to be a large store mixed with a house, so the owners could retire for the day just by heading upstairs. I stalked my way up to the upmost floor, but it seemed the building was mercifully empty. I peeked out the window, obscuring my body in the shadows. There were somewhere between 20 or 30 targets. Some were taking up positions in nearby buildings, just as I was. Some more hunkering down beside the sandbags. And others were still placing mounted machine guns. I even saw some carrying those shoulder-mounted explosive launchers. I see. They were preparing for a goddamn war, and they probably thought they were under attack from a rival group. That was probably why they weren't covering their corners properly, focusing all their firepower down the central road. The last mistake they would ever make. I had an angle on the vast majority of them from the shop that I was in. I took a deep breath, shouldered my lever action, and started shooting. The cycle of the lever action was a blur as I lit them up, prioritizing my targets based on weapon, position, and reaction. Those who looked like they had a decent position to die first, then the mounted weapons, finally the launchers. A new wave of screaming began as I put bullet after bullet into targets, each shot painting the walls a sand red. Every cycle of the action killing or disabling my targets. Sometimes I aimed for shots that weren't immediately lethal. Hearing your comrades scream in agony as they bleed out was an incredibly effective demoralizer. And it added to the cacophony of sounds, making me harder to pin down. I had even had time to casually reload my rifle, bullet by bullet, as the survivors cowered behind cover. It wouldn't help. I stretched that muscle again, and my next bullet tore straight through the sandbags, thick wooden barriers. Watching their comrades get shot straight through cover broke the rest, and they all ran screaming for the interior. None of them made it. I watched for a little longer, making sure there was no more survivors, putting down the screamers that weren't. I exited back the way I came, stepped over the fresh sea of bodily corpses, and entered the town hall through the side door. Someone was on the other side, covering the door with a handgun. His hands were shaking, his eyes were crazed. He didn't act fast enough before he died. But his death throes were enough